The storm outside the fourth-floor window of St. Jude's Hospital was relentless, mirroring the chaos that was about to unfold inside room 402. It was a Tuesday, a night I will never forget as long as I live. The intensive care unit is usually a place of controlled urgency, a symphony of beeping monitors and hushed footsteps. But that night, the air felt heavy, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with human malice. In the bed lay Evelyn Moore. To the city, she was a titan of industry, a woman who had built a textile empire from a single sewing machine in her basement. To the medical staff, she was patient 402, a 70-year-old woman in a deep coma following a massive stroke. And to the man standing over her, she was simply an obstacle. That man was Richard, her only son. He didn't look like a grieving child. He looked like a man checking the time at a bus stop. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my entire year's salary, Italian leather shoes that clicked annoyingly on the linoleum floor, and a Rolex that he checked every 3 minutes. I was the senior nurse on duty that night. My name is Sarah. I've been in the ICU for 20 years. I've seen death in all its forms. I've seen families tear each other apart over grief, and I've seen them come together in prayer. But I had never seen eyes as cold as Richard's. He wasn't looking at his mother's face. He was looking at the machines keeping her alive with a mixture of disgust and impatience. Dr. Evans, the attending physician, looked exhausted. He had been on a 36-hour shift, and his defenses were down. Richard was leaning in close to the doctor, holding a clipboard with a document that I knew all too well, the DNR order, Do Not Resuscitate. It was also the authorization to withdraw life support. I was adjusting the IV drip, making myself as invisible as possible, but I was listening. That's what nurses do. We listen to the things people say when they think no one matters. Richard's voice was a low hiss, like steam escaping a pipe. He whispered to the doctor, "Just sign it, doctor. Look at her. It's cruel to keep her like this. She doesn't feel anything anyway. She's gone. Let's just end this dignity. She doesn't feel anything anyway." That sentence hung in the air. Dr. Evans sighed, rubbing his temples. He took the pen. He was about to agree. It was the logical medical conclusion based on the scans. Massive brain hemorrhage. Unresponsive for 2 weeks. No reflex, no pain response. Technically, Richard was right. But instinct is a funny thing. As Richard pressed the pen into the doctor's hand, I reached under the sterile sheet to straighten Evelyn's hand, which was resting awkwardly against the bed rail. My fingers brushed against her palm. Her skin was cool, papery, fragile. And then, it happened. It wasn't a twitch. Muscle spasms are common in comas. They are random, jerky. This was different. It was deliberate. It was weak, terrifyingly weak, but it was a squeeze. Evelyn Moore's fingers curled around my thumb and applied pressure. I froze. The beeping of the monitor seemed to fade away, replaced by the thundering of my own heart. I looked at her face. It was a mask of stillness. Eyes closed, mouth slack, intubated. But my hand was burning where she held it. She was in there. She wasn't gone. She was locked in. I looked up. Richard was smiling, a thin, tight smile as the doctor brought the pen to the paper. "Stop!" The word left my mouth before I could process it. It was loud, too loud for the ICU. Dr. Evans jumped, the pen slipping from his fingers. Richard spun around, his eyes narrowing into slits. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard snapped, his voice losing that fake velvet tone of concern. "Dr. Evans, your nurse is interrupting a private family moment." "She squeezed my hand," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Doctor, she just squeezed my hand. She's responsive." Richard let out a short, sharp laugh. It sounded like a bark. "Don't be ridiculous. She's brain dead. The neurologist said there's zero activity. It's a reflex. You're giving us false hope, and frankly, it's unprofessional." He turned back to the doctor, his body language aggressive, dominating. "Sign the paper, Evans. Let's not let a hysterical nurse drag this out." Dr. Evans looked at me, then at the patient. He respected me, but he also respected the scans. "Sarah," he said gently, "reflexes can happen. The grasp reflex is primitive. It doesn't mean consciousness." "Check her," I insisted, moving to the other side of the bed, putting my body between Richard and the paperwork. "Please, Just check her one more time. Richard looked like he wanted to strangle me. His face turned a shade of red that clashed with his pristine collar. This is harassment, he spat. I'm going to report you to the board. Dr. Evans, perhaps to appease me or perhaps because he saw the desperation in my eyes, picked up his penlight. He opened Evelyn's eyelids. Evelyn, Evelyn, if you can hear me, look down. Look at the light. Nothing. Her eyes were fixed, glassy. Squeeze my hand, Evelyn, the doctor ordered, taking her wrist. Nothing. Her hand was limp. Richard smirked. It was the look of a man who had just won a poker game with a bluff. See, now can we proceed? My mother is suffering. I stared at Evelyn. Why didn't she do it again? Was I crazy? Had I imagined it? But then I saw it. The monitor. Her heart rate had spiked. Not by much, from 72 to 85. She was panicking. She couldn't move on command because she was exhausted. Or perhaps she was terrified of him. I realized then that she hadn't squeezed the doctor's hand because Richard was standing right there. She had squeezed mine because I was safe. I'm not imagining it, I whispered. But I stepped back. I had to be smart. If I pushed too hard now, Richard would have me removed from the room, and Evelyn would be defenseless. Dr. Evans hesitated. The spike in the heart rate hadn't gone unnoticed by him either. I think we should wait until morning, the doctor said, putting the clipboard down. The tachycardia is unusual. Let's give it another 12 hours. If there is no change by tomorrow morning, we will proceed with the extubation. Richard looked as if he had been slapped. 12 hours? What difference does 12 hours make? He demanded, slamming his hand on the bedrail. The noise was startling. Evelyn's heart rate jumped to 90. Mr. Moore, Dr. Evans said, his voice hardening. I am the physician here. We wait until morning. Please lower your voice, or I will have to ask you to leave. Richard took a deep breath, smoothing his tie, recomposing his mask. Fine, he said, his voice dripping with venom. Morning. But I'm staying here. I'm not leaving her side. He pulled a chair next to the bed and sat down, crossing his legs. He glared at me. It was a clear threat. I am watching you. I nodded and left the room, but I didn't go far. I went to the nurse's station and sat where I could see room 402 on the monitors. I knew two things for sure. Evelyn Moore was alive inside that body, and her son wanted her dead before sunrise. I needed to know why. I waited until 2:00 a.m. The hospital was in its deepest lull. Richard had apparently fallen asleep in the chair, his head lolling back, snoring softly. I crept back into the room under the pretense of checking the vitals. The storm outside had intensified, thunder rumbling like artillery fire in the distance. I moved silently to the bedside. I leaned close to Evelyn's ear, whispering so softly that even the air didn't seem to move. Evelyn, I whispered, I know you are in there. I felt you. If you can hear me, don't try to move your eyes. It takes too much energy. Just blink. Once for yes. I stared at her face, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then, slowly, agonizingly slowly, her right eyelid descended and lifted. A blink. Tears pricked my eyes. Okay, I whispered, my heart racing. Listen to me. Richard is asleep. Is he the reason you're scared? Blink, for yes. The blink came faster this time. Immediate. Is he trying to hurt you? Blink. Do you want me to call the police? Blink, blink, blink. Rapid fire. She was screaming at me with her eyelids. I squeezed her hand gently to let her know I understood. I had to get out of there and call security, but as I turned to leave, a hand clamped around my wrist. It wasn't Evelyn's, it was Richard's. He wasn't asleep. His eyes were wide open, bloodshot and manic. He gripped my arm with bruising force. What are you whispering to her? He hissed, standing up, towering over me. I was just checking her pupil response, I lied, my voice shaking. Let go of me. Richard didn't let go. He pulled me closer, his breath smelling of stale coffee and mints. You're a nuisance, Sarah. Is that your name? You're interfering in family business. You think you're a hero? You're just a minimum wage bedpan changer. She is brain dead. Anything you think you see is a hallucination. He shoved me back. Get out! And don't come back in here unless the machine beeps. I stumbled out of the room, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I couldn't just call the police based on blinks. They would think I was hysterical, just like Richard said. I needed proof. I needed to know what Richard was hiding. Why the rush? Why tonight? I went to the break room and pulled out my phone. I searched for Richard Moore finances. The internet is a cruel place, but useful. It didn't take long. Gossip columns and financial blogs had the dirt. Richard Moore was a gambler, not just a casual one, a whale. He owed millions to casinos in Vegas and Macau. There were rumors of loan sharks, of broken kneecaps, of deadlines. And the biggest deadline was tomorrow. A massive debt payment was due. If his mother died tonight, he inherited the empire immediately. If she lived, or worse, if she recovered and cut him off. He was a dead man walking. He wasn't killing her for mercy. He was killing her to pay a debt. I looked at the clock. 2:45 a.m. I was alone at the station. Dr. Evans was sleeping in the on-call room. The security guard was on the first floor doing rounds. It was just me, the storm, and a murderer in room 402. I looked at the monitor for room 402. Richard was standing up again. He wasn't looking at his mother. He was looking at the IV bag. He was reaching into his pocket. My blood ran cold. He pulled out a small vial. He wasn't going to wait for the doctor to pull the plug in the morning. He was going to overdose her now. A heart attack in her sleep. Clean. Quick. I didn't think. I didn't call the doctor. I ran. I sprinted down the hallway, my rubber-soled shoes squeaking on the wax. I burst into room 402, just as Richard was inserting a syringe into the IV port. "Get away from her!" I screamed, lunging at him. Richard, startled, dropped the syringe. It clattered to the floor, rolling under the bed. He spun around, his face twisted in a snarl of pure rage. "You stupid bitch!" he roared. He didn't care about being quiet anymore. He lunged at me. He was big, heavy, and desperate. He shoved me hard, and I flew backward, hitting my head against the medical cart. Trays, scalpels, and gauze crashed down around me with a deafening noise. My vision swam. I tasted copper in my mouth. Richard was coming for me. "You should have stayed at your desk," he growled, reaching for my throat. But before his hands could close around my windpipe, the room was filled with a new sound. It wasn't the monitor. It wasn't the storm. It was the high-pitched, piercing alarm of the code blue button. I had managed to kick the wall panel as I fell. The alarm wailed through the corridor, flashing blue lights reflecting off the rain-slicked window. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Security, Dr. Evans, other nurses. Richard froze. He looked at the door, then at the syringe under the bed, then at me. Panic replaced the rage. He scrambled to retrieve the syringe, to hide the evidence, but it was too late. 2 security guards burst into the room, followed by a disheveled Dr. Evans. "Grab him," I yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the son. "He tried to inject her. Look under the bed." Richard tried to push past the guards. "She's crazy. She attacked me," he screamed, putting on his best performance yet. "She's unstable. Look at this mess." For a second, the guards hesitated. It was the word of a wealthy man against a nurse on the floor surrounded by debris. But Dr. Evans wasn't looking at us. He was looking at the monitor. Evelyn's heart rate was 140. She was terrified. And then he looked at Evelyn herself. Her eyes were wide open, not staring into nothingness, but staring directly at her son, and tears were streaming down her face. It was a look of such profound betrayal and sorrow that it sucked the air out of the room. "Check the syringe," Dr. Evans ordered the guards, his voice cold as ice. One of the guards kicked the object sliding under the bed. He picked it up with a gloved hand. It wasn't a hospital-issued syringe. It was unmarked. "Call the police," Dr. Evans said. "Now." Richard collapsed. Not physically, but the facade collapsed. He started sobbing, begging, babbling about debts, about how they were going to kill him, about how his mother wouldn't mind helping him one last time. He confessed everything in a stream of pathetic excuses while the guards handcuffed him to the bed rail, the very bed he had tried to turn into a coffin. I sat up, dizzy, my head throbbing. I crawled over to Evelyn's side. I took her hand again. She squeezed it, this time strong, unmistakable. I looked into her tear-filled eyes and smiled through my own pain. "It's over, Evelyn," I whispered. "He can't hurt you. You're safe." The police arrived 10 minutes later, but it felt like hours. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence that was broken only by the clicking of handcuffs and the reading of Miranda rights. Richard Moore, the man who had walked in like a king, was dragged out like a criminal, kicking and screaming obscenities at his own mother. They bagged the syringe as evidence. Later, the toxicology report would confirm what Dr. Evans suspected. It was a concentrated dose of potassium chloride. It stops the heart instantly. It mimics a massive cardiac arrest. It would have been the perfect crime, untraceable in a woman with her medical history, if not for a single squeeze of a hand. The next few days were a blur of depositions and flashing cameras. I became the star witness, but the real battle was happening inside room 402. With the threat removed, Evelyn began to fight. It wasn't a movie-style awakening where she sat up and asked for breakfast. It was a grueling, inch-by-inch war against her own body. The diagnosis was locked-in syndrome, likely caused by the stroke. She had been fully conscious the entire time. She had heard the doctors discussing her death. She had felt the nurses bathing her. And worst of all, she had heard her son negotiating the price of her life. I visited her every day before my shift started. I talked to her, read her the newspapers, skipping the articles about Richard, and held her hand. We developed a code. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. We talked about everything. I learned she loved orchids. I learned she regretted working so much and missing Richard's childhood, blaming herself for the monster he had become. It was heartbreaking to watch a powerful woman reduced to blinking to communicate. But her spirit was ironclad. She wasn't giving up. She had a score to settle. 6 months later, the trial of the state versus Richard Moore began. The courtroom was packed. The media called it the inheritance trial. Richard's defense team, paid for by liquidating his own assets since his mother's accounts were frozen, tried to paint me as an incompetent nurse who hallucinated the attack. They tried to say the syringe was mine. It was brutal. I sat on the stand for 3 hours, being grilled, my character assassinated. But then, the prosecution played their trump card. They wheeled Evelyn into the courtroom. She was still in a wheelchair, frail, her face partially paralyzed, but she was awake. She couldn't speak clearly yet, but she could type. Using a special eye-tracking tablet, she had prepared a statement. The courtroom fell dead silent, as the computerized voice read her words aloud. It wasn't the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a CEO. "My son," the robotic voice echoed, "did not kill me for mercy. He tried to kill me for money. I heard him whisper. I heard him laugh. I felt his breath on my face when he told the doctor to let me die. A mother knows her child. I knew he was lost, but I never thought he was evil, until that night." The camera zoomed in on Richard. He couldn't look at her. He stared at the table, defeated. The jury took less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud. The judge, clearly moved by Evelyn's testimony, gave him the maximum sentence: 25 years without parole. Richard was led away in shackles. He stopped briefly near his mother's wheelchair. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a curse. Evelyn simply closed her eyes. She turned her head away. It was the hardest thing she ever had to do, but she cut the cord. She chose survival over blood. Life returned to a new normal. Evelyn Moore made a miraculous recovery, regaining limited speech and movement in her right arm. She didn't return to running her empire. She sold it. She liquidated everything. The residential Imperium project, scrapped. The textile factories, sold to ethical investors. She took her fortune, the millions that Richard had tried to kill for, and she did something that shocked the city. She started the Sarah Foundation, named after me, much to my embarrassment. It was a trust fund dedicated to patient advocacy, legal aid for the elderly, and financial support for nurses who blow the whistle on medical malpractice. I remember the day she told me. We were sitting in the garden of her new, smaller home. The orchids were in bloom. "Why, Sarah?" I asked her. "I just did my job." Evelyn looked at me, her speech slow but deliberate. "You didn't just do your job. You listened. Everyone else saw a body. You saw a person. You stood between a monster and his prey, and you didn't flinch. That's not a job, Sarah. That's a soul. She reached out and took my hand, the same hand she had squeezed in the dark terror of the ICU. You gave me my voice back. Now I'm using it to make sure no one else goes unhurt. I'm still a nurse at St. Jude's. I still work the night shift. The work is hard, the hours are long, and sometimes the families are difficult. But every time I pass room 402, I pause. I look at the empty bed and I remember. I remember the storm, the whisper, and the squeeze. And whenever I see a patient who can't speak, who looks like they are gone, I lean in close. I hold their hand and I whisper, I'm listening. Because sometimes the difference between life and death isn't a machine. It's someone willing to pay attention. And as for Richard, I heard he works in the prison laundry, washing sheets. I hope every time he touches that fabric, he remembers the sterile white sheet he tried to pull over his mother's face. Justice, like a good nurse, is patient, but eventually it makes its rounds.